So we can't talk about mindset without talking about the F word. What's the F word?
Funding.
Fear.
Fear.
Right? Fear is honestly one of the number one issues with mindset, because a lot of things are driven from fear, right? And what happens with fear? What do? We let fear control us, right? Fear essentially lets us go through a lot of different things that are happening, and we're not able to really be effective as long as we're letting fear control us. So where does fear come from? We'll talk about that in a second. One of her favorite quotes from Karate Kid is an amazing, amazing movie. One of her favorite quotes from that is, "It's okay to lose to an opponent, but never okay to lose to fear. Because then you just lose to yourself." All right, so how do you deal with fear? Fight, flight, or freeze, right? I think everyone should be familiar with these ideas. It's the same idea as how you deal with a dangerous situation in real life, right? You're dealing with that. You either fight, or you freeze, right? Now, the problem with this is fighting helps sometimes, right? Because you try to rationalize and reason through it. Your power, you're like, you know what? No, this is not, I'm not going to let fear control me. I'm going to rationalize through this. I'm going to use logic. Problem with using logic is that fear is not logical. Fear is not something that's driven by anything rational at all, right? Fear is an emotion, and by default is devoid of logic. So it's like saying, you know what? I'm going to fight fire with air and just fan my hand at it, because it's not going to matter, right? You got to fight fire with water, or you got to figure out how you want to attack that, right? So it only helps sometimes if you fight, because sometimes you reason through it, sometimes you can't, because it gets to the point where it's too powerful for you at that point. You can flight, you can run away from it, right? You can quit that thing and try to do something less scary. That's basically what that looks like in the business owner world, right? You quit, you drop the business, you're like, you know what, I'm going to be an employee. And sometimes that's the right move. That's what I'm saying. It helps less in terms of being a business owner, but not everyone's cut out for entrepreneurship or business ownership, right? The idea that people have been selling during COVID annoys the heck out of me, because they're like, oh, anyone can do this. Anyone can be a business owner. Anyone can start their own business and run their own business. No, they can't. I'm sorry, but they can't, right? If you do the work to shift your mindset, to figure out what you want to do, and actually really commit to it and understand your why and all the other things, there's a lot of work to do that, right? It has to matter to you. It has to matter enough to put in that energy for that. Not everyone's ready to do that, right? Those are people that are trying to use fear to sell you something. And that's the most sickening kind of marketing, to be honest with you. So that helps a lot less. And then freezing helps almost never. And I say almost never because I don't speak in absolutes. Nothing is absolutely never going to work, right? But 99.9999999% of the time it's not going to work. Okay, let's be honest. All right. The idea is, the way this looks is you pause everything, just freeze, and just wait and see if things improve. A lot of businesses did this with COVID, right? And a lot of businesses are not around anymore for that reason. I want to pull something back for a second. I want to highlight something that happened in the 1920s. The last depression we faced was in the 20s, right? And some of you heard me tell this story before. You heard me speak before. But P&G, Procter and Gamble, right? They make all these homemade, like home cleaning supplies and that kind of thing, right? All the staples that you guys use at home, like, you know, Mr. Clean and whatnot, right? During the 20s, all these companies, everyone's all afraid. There's so much fear because this market crashed. The economy's in the tank. Everyone's afraid, right? And no one's spending money. All these companies froze. They're like, we're not going to spend any money on marketing. We're going to just freeze and wait and see what happens, right? Sure. Okay, awesome. Conserve your money. P&G doubled their marketing budget. They didn't freeze. They did the opposite. They doubled their marketing budget during that time. And so they were, when everyone else was avoiding the market and not putting their names out there, P&G was advertising twice as much. So people are seeing P&G's name and all these different products that much more often, right? So they're seeing it twice as often. And so what happened when that depression finally lifted? What do you blow your nose in when you get sick? Anyone? Milry, what do you blow your nose in?
Tissue.
Okay, tissue. Kleenex. Someone said it. Kleenex. There it is, right? Whether it's a Kleenex or not, Kleenex is a brand, by the way. Whether it's Kleenex or not, it's a Kleenex because everyone calls it a Kleenex, right? That's the same idea, right? Clorox is not the only form of bleach out there, but Clorox is what people call it, whether it's bleach or not, whether it's like that brand or not. Why is that? Because they now own that market, because everyone knows that and sees that their name is out there. So they killed everybody because of that. They didn't let fear stop them. They pushed forward, right?
Yeah.
So the question becomes now, which one of these is the right way to deal with it? With fear? None of them are, right? There's no right or wrong way to deal with fear. The best way to deal with fear is not to deal with any of these, right? Don't subject yourself to this thing. Again, entrepreneur mindset, get out of the box. These are all in the box, right? The way to deal with fear is to accept it, understand it, embrace it, to believe it or not, because your fear is coming from somewhere inside you, a place I call the shadow. What Carl Jung actually calls it a shadow. I took that on after him, but it's the shadow is telling you that, right? It's your shadow, and your shadow is not a bad part of you, despite what people may think, right? The shadow is actually you in your most immature mind, dealing with things in the most immature way, but trying to take care of you in the most immature way, right? It has no idea how to protect you in the situation. So what it's going to do, it defaults to what it knows. Either you run, either you fight, or you freeze. And none of those three things is going to help you in the situation. So what you do is you understand it. Seek to understand why you're being afraid, why you're afraid right now. Seek to understand what's going on for you right now. What in the situation is triggering that fear for you, triggering that idea of what you want to do with it. And then don't do that. Just understand it and embrace it and let it wash over you like a wave. Because that's all it is. It's just a wave. It's like, you know what? Yes, I'm afraid of this. I acknowledge that I'm afraid of this, and I'm going to do it anyway. You're not fighting it. You're not running from it, and you're not freezing. Right? Because guess what? Doing that thing matters more to you than not doing that thing. It has to. Otherwise, you're not doing the right thing. Right? That's where the idea of resolve comes in.